Got it. Okay. I'm not sure what everyone's experience is with APIs. This is, I think, pretty beginner friendly. So I guess we could start. Oh, oops. Yes. So what are APIs? Some of you might have heard about APIs in your classes. API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's something that you will most likely use like if you become a software engineer. There's a lot of technologies that use APIs, and you'll learn about that soon. So an application programming interface enables companies to open up their application's data and functionality to external third-party developers, business partners, and internal departments within their companies. This might sound confusing, but basically this means that services and products communicate with each other. They leverage each other's data and functionality through a documented interface. This is a really common example that's used if you ever learn about APIs, the restaurant analogy. So you can think of APIs as the waiter when you are in a restaurant. You are the customer and the waiter asks you what you want. In terms of technology, in the technology world, this would be the client. So the client asks the waiter what they want. That's a request. And then the waiter goes to the kitchen. And the kitchen can be like, I guess, in the CS world, the server or the database. So in this whole, I guess, process of the restaurant, you as the client never has to, like, you never have to go to the kitchen to ask specifically what you want. Sorry. You never have to ask what you want. You never have to go to the kitchen. You don't have to know how to cook to go to a restaurant. Everything's done for you. And then the kitchen gives your response, which would be the food. So the waiter is the messenger, and the messenger goes back and forth between the customer and the kitchen, or the app and the server. So why do we use APIs? APIs are used to access data. They could be used to get data from third parties, and a common example is a phone weather app. So if you guys have an iPhone, iPhones have the weather app. I think that's fun. Yeah, the weather app on your phones, and it tells you the weather based on your location. But Apple never has to check Apple, the company, does not check the weather around the world. They use the information provided by the Weather Channel. The Weather Channel is responsible for checking the weather, I guess, across the globe. And they just use the Weather Channel's API to get the information. So they exchange information back and forth. Apple never has to check any temperature anywhere. They just use the Weather Channel. We also use APIs to hide complexities. So there's a lot of APIs that run many different things behind the scenes that you don't really see. An example could be your GPS location. So hardware systems have their own APIs. So for example, let's say Android. Android tracks your location. Google Maps or Instagram, they don't have to worry about tracking your location, even though they do ask for permission. They're not the ones responsible for tracking your location. It is somewhere that's already within the hardware system. So they just exchange information that way. APIs are also used to extend functionality. So if you ever use a Google Home or an Alexa, they don't know everything, even though it might seem like they do know everything. You know, you ask them a question and they answer. They could work with different appliances that you have at home. But the way that they know what you want is through API. So if you buy an appliance, like let's say I buy a smart light or whatever, and I want to use it with my Google Home, and I say like turn on the light. Google Home knows that by talking to the appliance's API, and yeah, that's how they work. Also, APIs are used for securities. Hardware systems have the ability to limit what information is released to external parties. I guess a good example is the GPS location. Yes. Okay, so what APIs exist? New York City Open Data has a bunch of data available for anyone to use. It's free. They have open parking and camera violations. This is an API provided by the New York City government. YouTube Analytics is the name for YouTube's API. It's provided by Google, and you could retrieve a lot of information about YouTube. Spotify Web is the name of the Spotify API. You can retrieve data from Spotify, including music libraries. Google Maps Platform is the Google Maps API. You could use it to create custom maps. You could use it to create a searchable map, check-in function, display live data syncing with location. There's a lot of features that you could use. Uber and Pokemon Go use the Google Maps API. They're not in charge of creating a whole map of the whole world. They're just like, Google did the job for me, so we're just going to use the Google Maps API. NASA Insight is the API provided by NASA. NASA has a lot of interesting APIs. The Insight gives you the weather on Mars. So you could check the weather on Mars. They have it available for you to use if you ever want to use it for anything. NASDAQ has an API. You can use it to access real-time and historical stock market data. Yes. So what is REST API and what does it mean? Some of you may have heard what REST API is. People use it and they throw it around, but I feel like sometimes it could be confusing. So REST stands for Representational State Transfer. And basically, most APIs that people use, like Google's API, Twitter's API, I'm pretty sure Spotify's API, they are REST APIs, which just means that they work really similarly to HTTP protocols. So for those of you who don't know, HTTP protocols are like communications between the client and the server. You could use commands like get, put, delete. REST APIs use the same commands. So when you have, like, let's say you have a company, like we could say, for example, Instagram, right? So I have a website named Instagram.com, right? Then, I have a website named Instagram.com, and then I could put like /API to access the API, and then put like /users, let's say. And that would be my endpoint to gather information about the users. So it's really similar to HTTP protocols, how you get a website running through, you know, the little search bar. So most companies have that, and they have like their, they have the word API within their endpoint, and then you could use like, let's say /users, they name it, or /users, and then you could search up user1 at the end, /user1, then you can get information about user1, like user with the ID 1. Yeah, so that's pretty much how they work. Yeah, and I think that's it for the presentation. Yes. So I guess we can start coding. So I guess I'll leave it to Bibi.
That was a wonderful presentation. So yeah, that's kind of like a high level of APIs and what it is. One of the projects that I think everyone goes through in one class or another is making the weather API. And I've probably made it like a few times, so I didn't want to choose that for this workshop. So we came together and chose like a stock tracker. So we'll just yes, we'll share the recording in Discord, typically like a few hours after like the workshop ends. So yeah, I guess I'll share my screen. Screen I want to share. Okay. Okay, so we're going to import a GitHub repo with like the CSS code and like the framework already set up. We're not going to go over HTML, CSS. So we'll just import that code and work off of it. We're just going to use one file. So the first thing to do is create a code sandbox account. I could resend the link in the chat and give you all like a minute to do that. And be better. Well, I guess I could show a preview of like what the project we're working on is in the meantime. So basically this would be the end result where it's a stock tracker and we just like input a stock that we want to look at. So let's say I want to see IBM and hit search and it shows like a real-time data of where that stock is. So on the bottom, like the x-axis, it has like the date. So like September 26, September 12th and so on. And the y-axis, this is like the dollar amount. And then like if you hover over it, it shows like the highs and the lows and the dates. I don't know what those mean, but I'm sure someone who does study stocks knows what those means. Useful for QC trading competition. Oh, there's a competition on that. I'm sure they make it money. So yeah, that's the project that we're working with today. So does everyone have their code sandbox set up? If someone doesn't, then message no in the chat and I'll wait like another minute. I don't want to start. Okay, cool. So we are going to import the template library. So take this. This is the GitHub repo that we're working off of. So just copy this link. And we're going to make a new sandbox. So at the top right is where it says create sandbox. Click that. And then we're going to import the project. So press import project. And then paste the GitHub repo link that I sent in the chat. Paste that right there. And then hit import and fork. Let me know if anyone has trouble doing that or want me to go over that again. Okay, so what we have here is like just the, okay, somebody said something. Lily with the memes. So what we have here is just kind of like the template of the code. So the file that we're going to work on, which makes the entire stock thing that I just showed you, that's not made yet. So what we have is just a blank web page. On the left panel, so if you hit this files icon on the left side, it has two folders, public and source. So all of our JavaScript code is going to go inside source. It doesn't need to, it's just like the way that this repo was organized. And in public, we have like the HTML file. So typically with HTML files, we name them index for the homepage. And the index file is what we usually see like, that's like, that holds the HTML and like the contents that we want to show on the web page, right? So let's see what that file holds. So we can ignore all of the stuff at the top. It's mainly for styling and stuff, but the main part, the important part is this line in line 18 where it says div. So what a div in HTML is basically a container, and a container can hold any elements like HTML elements. So like an input, a form, a button, images, and so on. So it just like groups those kind of elements together, and that's inside a container, which is what we call div in HTML. So this div, it's empty. It doesn't hold anything inside. It doesn't hold like H1 or anything. There's nothing in it. It's just empty div. And this div, we gave an ID of root. So what an ID is that it gives a specific element, HTML element, a ID by association. So like in like an example for like real life where we're students on campus, like we're each given an ID. So like the 8-digit number that I was given, that is my specific ID. Whereas similarly, like this div, like root is specific to this div. That's the ID of this div. So yeah, so the importance of this idea of being root is if we go over to the source folder and we go inside of index.js, so the JavaScript file, we see that ID called root, right? So what this is basically, this is like standard JavaScript where it's like in the document, so in the entire web page, so the document itself, it's finding an element that has the ID of root. And what it does to it is it passes this element inside of this render, and it passes it inside of the app component. So this is a component in React, which is basically like a file. Yeah, it's basically like a file. So anything that we do inside of here translates onto what's outputted in here. So it's kind of like inside of the app.js file, which we import, right? Whatever we do in here is the input. And then when we call it, it's kind of like a function. You know, when you call a function, it outputs some information. So when we call it here, this basically outputs whatever we did inside this JavaScript file. So let's take a look what we did inside of app.js. Is this supposed to be this? I don't think so. 1 second. It's not right.
No, I think app.test is like, it's just to test the app.js. It's
But
app.js, that's the main one.
some code is missing actually. Because app.js is supposed to call stock.
Oh, it's because we didn't make the stock file yet. That's why I removed it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I removed the stock component.
Gotcha. Okay. So in this app.js, we're going to call stock. We're going to get an error because we did not make stock yet. So inside of here, we're going to make a stock file. I should do that first, actually. And whatever we put inside that stock file, so the entire graph that we just saw with like the API that's calling the stock, you know, the data points and stuff, that's going to be outputted when we call it. So we're going to create a file called stock. And when we call this, that's when like the graph and stuff will pop up. But I'm just going to comment this out for now, because we have not made that file yet. So let's go ahead and make it. So over by the source folder, or, you know, source, hover over that. And then we have these icons on the right. Click the new file icon. So it's the middle one, the third one. And we're going to name this file stock.js. So inside of this file, we'll have like all of our code. So we're going to put 2 imports. We're going to import React hooks, which is something that I'll explain briefly in a moment. And then we're also going to import plots. So these are libraries that are external from React, the language itself. So we can use, for instance, plot. So plot from React.plotly.js. This makes that graph that we saw in the final demo. This makes that for us, so we don't have to actually code that out. Like React has a library that does that. And the other import is to use the React hooks, state, comma, use. Yeah. So this is importing these two hooks from React. And what a React hook is, I'll explain that in a second. I'll explain it when we use it. So typically, in like program languages like Java and C++, there's like classes. And the same thing applies to JavaScript or React JavaScript, where we do have classes which extends components. And like we saw, we can call those classes or functions as such. In a newer version of React, they created this version where you can use functions that act the same as components or classes. So we're gonna create our first function and call it stock. So inside of here, we're going to call the API, set the data and the return. So that is our first function that we're going to use. So let's make our first variable const. Const makes a variable in JavaScript. JSON data equals use state. So this is a loaded line. What this does is it uses the first React hook. So this use state states, okay, I have notes on states. States are object that stores the value of properties belonging to a component that could change over a period of time. And so you can think of a state as it holds a certain value before anything in the web page changes. And so states can be modified like whenever there's a user action or a network change. So states can change like when you press a button, you can change a state. Or when the page refreshes, then the state is empty, like it doesn't hold anything. So states they're not like permanent variables. They basically hold a value for a certain amount of time. And this is useful because like in our search bar, which we're going to make, we're going to search for stock, but every time we hit that enter, we want the value of the state to change to whichever stock symbol that we're searching for, right? So this particular line we're going to use this state to save the JSON data that we get from the API. And I'm going to show you like a visualization of like what the JSON data is and looks like. So it'll be better to like understand what that actually is. And then the set data is the function call. So in like this version of React hooks, this is the value that we're setting, and this is how the function call to set that value. Is there one? So like if we were to set this variable JSON data, give this the value, we would call this function, right? Set data, and then put some value in it, some value. I'm using comments, so this 2/ is comments in JavaScript. So this doesn't affect our code at all. It's just like, just to visualize it, I guess. So this is how you would set the state. Any questions on that? So second, we can have multiple states in one file because we wouldn't want to keep track of one thing. We'd have like multiple things to keep track of. Oh, another thing too. So inside of this use state function, right, we have these parentheses. So we have those because we want to store JSON data, and you can kind of think of that as an object. And so for objects, we're going to use parentheses to store those. We're going to see in this state that this stores a string, and it would look different. So set search equal use states. So here we are going to use this variable or the state to store. We're going to use this to store the stock that we want to search. For example, like if we want to see how Amazon stock is doing, it would hold like the Amazon symbol, right? So search is the value. This is the thing that we're going to store Amazon inside of. So Amazon will be stored inside of search, and set search is the function call, right? So we'll do like set search. And then if we want to store the value Amazon inside of the search, it'll be like Amazon. And then the difference here is that in this state, we want to store a string. And since a string, we use quotes, whereas this one, we want to store an JSON object. So we're going to use brackets. Okay. So there are a couple more variables which we'll need to keep track of. X equal an array. So this is an array, right? It stores like a list of values. Let close equal an array. So these variables are the things that, remember when I hovered over those bars in the graph, it popped up like the stock details, which high, and then let low. So like the low of the stock, let's open. And we're storing these into arrays, and we'll see why in just a second. Open. So is there anything else I want to say about states? Oh yes, so in a state, so states are very important. They're very complex. Every time the state of an object changes, so every time like JSON data or like the search, so every time we hit enter in like the search bar we're going to make, right, and we change it from Amazon, let's say we type in Amazon, press search. So the search, this value here is Amazon. But let's say I type in another value for IBM in the search bar and I hit search. Then this value right here changes. And every time this value changes, then this function, or as we'll see just now in the next React hook called use effects, will be rerun. So everything inside of here will be executed once like any of these states change. Okay, so let's go ahead and create use effects. So yeah, like I said, states can have multiple properties. This is one property, here's another. And then the set state or the use state is the one. Set state we'll get to. Yeah, so use effect is another kind of React hook. And this basically tells the program or React that your component needs to do something after it's re-rendered. So basically what that means is that this function right here is what will be run every single time like we hit that enter button or like a state changes, right? Okay, so I see a lot in the chat. Okay, that's a good question. So in JavaScript, we have these thing called array functions, arrow functions, arrow functions. So if you're familiar with Java, where it's like, I don't know, I'll use that example. So like this parentheses is basically the argument of the function, right? So let's say we want to pass in, the parameter of name, and then in here we can do like print name or something, right? So in this function, there is no function name. That's a wrong name. Okay. Let's say I'm writing pseudocode. We have some function max that takes the stop. I don't know what I'm doing. That takes in two parameters, x and y, right? So what this function would do will return the higher value of x or y. So like if x was 3 and y was 5, then it'll return 5. In this example, this function, right, it has a name called max. With arrow functions, however, there is no name. And the reason for this is that you use it like simultaneously. So whatever you write inside of the scope, like inside of these curly brackets, you can only use this function once, basically. You can only use it once, because like, let's say outside here, I want to do the same thing. I want to call this function. There's no way that you can, because it just lives inside of the scope. Like, yeah. I'm not sure if that makes it any less confusing. So like in this example where we have empty parentheses, so that means that there's no arguments. So like it would be a function that holds like get name. Get name would have no parentheses, right? It would just return a global variable of name. And then like somewhere up here, it would be like string name. So like this is empty, right? We don't need any arguments inside of this function. Similarly, this is a function which has no arguments. However, if we did need it, we would just pass it in like this. Like we could pass in low to this function, right? And then the arrows, they're just it's just like the syntax of arrow functions. So you have the arguments and then the arrow, and then anything inside here is like the code that you want to do. Something, right? Does that make it any confusing? In a way, yes. Arrow functions, they do some sort of code. So they could return something, they could output something, they could change something. Yeah. So inside of this, use effects. And so this use effects function, it does whatever we're going to put inside of these curly brackets inside of this scope, right? It does this every time the state changes. So every time, in this case, it's going to repeat everything we write in here every time we press that search a stock button. So let's go ahead and write the code for this. API key. Okay. So this is the API part of the project. It's part of every function declaration. It's part, this is part of every arrow function declaration. So this is the basic format of an arrow function. You don't necessarily have to return something if you're using an arrow function. It can return nothing at all. But there's different types of functions in JavaScript. There's also like an async function, async await. Just like the regular functions, right? Like above here, this is one example of a function, and there's another one. I don't remember how it looks, but a lot of front-end developers use arrow functions when they only want to do something like once. So for this, we're using an arrow function because we just want to do this every time like a user presses that enter button. Like we would never use like, we would never want this code that we're writing inside of here if like someone doesn't press that button, if that makes sense. So that's why we're using arrow functions. Okay. I'll probably like send like a document that could explain it better than I can. So inside of what do we want to do inside this function? So like every time the user like submits stock symbol in the search bar, what exactly do we want to do? We want to retrieve that data of that particular stock. And then with that data, we want to put it into a graph onto our website, right? So retrieve data from the stock. And we get this from the API. So we're going to call the API in this function and data to put into our chart. Oh, really? I don't really like ink sync in a way. I find them really confusing. Okay, so this is the API part. Let me just get the website for you. So there's like a bunch of different APIs out there, especially for like stocks and stuff. So the one we chose is called Alpha Vantage. And okay, free key. I'm gonna send this in the chat. So click on that website in the chat, and we're gonna have to make a API key. So APIs can be public or private. So this is just a public API that Alpha Vantage like came out with. But every API needs a key. So we have to register for a key. And so just go on that website. I am a student. And an email. Get free API key. So at the bottom, it gives me my API key. Copy that. Don't copy the period, just the letters, and then go back to our code. And then inside of our variable called API key, paste it inside of quotations. So this API key is what we need to call the API. API call. So now for the API call, I'm just gonna send you the URL. Or before that, let's make a variable. Let stock symbol equal, let's just call it Facebook for now. So the stock symbol, if we're gonna look at the Facebook stock, and I will send you that in here. So just copy and paste that into the API call. So this link, we're gonna take a look at it right now and see what it actually does. Oops, no. So copy that link and paste it inside of this variable called let API call and put like one quotation and save that. So now let's see what it actually is. Let's visualize it and see like what we're actually looking at. So this is the link that I sent in the chat. Just paste it in like your bar on like your web browser. And the parts where you see this part where you see the stock symbol thing. So like this part right here, delete that, like the the dollar sign and the curly bracket stock symbol, and replace it with the stock symbol that we're looking at. So let's say we're looking at Facebook. Sorry, don't put quotes, just FB. Symbol equal FB. And then there's the API key. So let's just like copy and paste our API key without the quotes. Equals. And hit enter. So we have, let me just go through that once again. Facebook as the symbol. And then where it says API key equals, put your API key and hit enter. So now we see like one giant JSON object. And what this does is it shows us the Facebook API. So here we have like metadata, information, daily time series, the symbol that we use, right? So this is the API key or API call for Facebook. Last refreshed on this date. And then we have like time series, daily, and then like by date, right? So today, yesterday, the day before that, and then it shows the open, high, lows. So we're gonna retrieve all of these information, and then we're gonna put that information into our graph. In case somebody get it. This is just the link, but you can use it with your own API key that we just made. Any questions on that? Okay, so this is how we make the API call. And then so let's get our fetch. Now we're gonna fetch our API call. So using this API call, once that is fetched or once that's retrieved, we're going to then take the response of whatever was collected and do response.json. So this is a lot. So basically what this does, it gets the API call. So like that JSON object we did, or this entire thing, right? And then what it does, it takes the response of this call and converts it into a JSON. Some APIs are already like a JSON object, but you can never be too sure to just like convert them into JSON using the JSON function, which is a JavaScript function. So taking the response of the call and then yeah. And then after that is finished, we want to take the data so like the stuff in here can be anything. These are just like variable names, right? So we can name it n and put like n.json, right? It doesn't have any like meaning to do with like the API itself. It's just like the variable or like what's being returned from these series of steps. So taking the data, and data here would be like the JSON object, like the entire thing that we converted to a JSON object. And then from there, what we want to do is set data, time, series, daily. So set data, that looks familiar, right? That is our state. So we're setting the JSON data, this value, right? We're setting that using the function. Remember that to set a state, we use the function call that we made, so set data, right? And we give it some value. So similarly here, we're setting the state. So we're setting data and we're giving it this value. So let's actually look at what this is, time series daily. If we go back over to the JSON object, we see time series daily here. And if we recall from like the Python workshop where we discussed a bit about dictionaries, you can kind of think of this as that, right? So this is the key and the colon, and then after the colon, you have the pair. So like the key, which is time series daily, which we're calling right here. So we're calling that. And what it's returning is its value. So every single thing here. So like all of this information. So everything from this open curly bracket to the closing curly brackets, that would be like all the way down here. So like this one, which holds all the dates and like the information that we want. So that's what we're setting inside of JSON data. So JSON data is equal to all of these dates and times and prices. Okay. Make sure to put the colon after that then. So now, that's about like what we wanted to do with this use effect. Something's missing. Okay.
You're supposed to put the, yeah, I think you did it correctly now.
It like this parentheses like autofilled here. So don't do that. I'll just like copy this. Okay, so what does this do right now? I'll just take this part out for a second. So what did we accomplish in here? We call the API, right? We got some stock symbol. The stock symbol is Facebook. And we got the data for the Facebook stock symbol. And then we convert it into a JSON, and then we set the data into our state. So we retrieve the data from the stock, yes. And then next, we're going to put the data into our graph. However, so use effect does a few things. So like we said, like when the state changes, that's when use effect like does everything inside of here. So just gonna pull up my notes. Okay, so we're gonna add this line right here, and I'm gonna explain what that means. So use effect has this thing where it does like the functional stuff that you wanted to do, and then afterwards you put a comma and then these brackets. So let's say like we remove the bracket, then this function will only get called once, and that's when like the page is loaded. If we remove search, like if it was just empty, it will only call it once. If there were no square brackets, then it will run every single second. And if you put search, then it will only run every time that search is changed. So what is search? Search is the state, right? And what the state does is it stores the stock that we want to search. So every single time that we type in our soon-to-be search bar, every single time you type in there and press submit, the value of search will change, and we'll do that functionality in just a second. So every time search changes to like from Amazon, or we like erase that and we want to search IBM, type in IBM search, then use effect, this entire function right here, and everything we did inside of it will rerun. And so what we want to do is, instead of Facebook, we want to set this equal to search. There's a bunch of yellow lines because we didn't set search yet. So basically every time somebody types in something in the search bar and hits search, then this will run. And what this does is it takes that value and then it gets the API call, and then it gets the JSON data and retrieves it and stores it inside of this state. Okay, so that is that. So now the next step is we want to take this data and we want to push it into these empty arrays. And so like, for example, close, right? Close is this array. What we want to do is take all these closes from that big giant JSON object and push it into that array. And then we store it here. So then when we go to so when we go to the graph, then we hover over it and we'll see like those variable names. So let's do that. So to go over each single one of these dates, so to get the data from here, from here, from here, and there's like a million others, we're gonna do a for loop. So for var, let's name our variable date. So we're going through each date in the JSON data. So the information that was stored inside of the state. For each date, we're going to push it inside of X. Like if you remember or recall from like the beginning of this project where I showed you the graph, on the right side, the X axis showed the date, the Y axis showed the like amount. So open dot push. Oh, so push basically pushes like an element inside of the array. So like X dot push pushes date. So for instance, let's say X was empty. After the first loop, it like pushes like 10, well, let's just say the date. And then after the next push, it pushes another date, right? And so on. So push just like append stuff into a list or an array. So we have our other list array. Open data. Close. And then one dot space open. So what this does is it gets the date from JSON data, and from the date object, it gets the one dot open. So let's go over and see what that actually is. So remember, this entire thing is the JSON data, right? So all of those are JSON data, and then it retrieves date. So whichever date that we're on in the for loop, so let's say it's the first loop or the first iteration inside of there, it gets the first date. So this would be the date. And so this part right here, right, that I highlighted, just that part of that line, that is everything inside of here. And what we want for our open list is we just want this value right here. So to get that, we do one dot open. And what is returned from this entire thing is that 337. Okay, so let's do that for like the rest of the arrays that we have. Dot push JSON data, and then date, and then 2 dot high. So just following that very large object flow. So dot push JSON data, then date, and then 3 dot low, and then close dot push, and then JSON data, and then dates 4 dot. So yeah, this is just a variable that's being passed inside, right? So let's say to kind of understand this a bit better, let's say we just want this date. What we would do is like JSON data. You don't have to write this part, I'm just explaining something. JSON data, and then put that date. And let's say we want to see the open of that date. This is how you would retrieve like this particular value from the entire JSON object. So that's kind of what we're doing inside of here. But instead of like actually specifying each single date, we're just going through a for loop and letting that do that for us. So now let's go on to our next step, return. So what did we achieve here? We achieved pushing or filling all of the data points into our arrays. And so the next step would to be to actually plot the graph. So let's make a div. Div is HTML. So inside this return, return is, if we recall, like a return of a function basically, right? So our stock file will return whatever we put inside of these parentheses is going to return this HTML. Basically, this HTML is going to be returned to app.js, which will call stock. I'll do that afterwards. We're going to call stock in here, and then it returns that. And then, sorry. And then app.js will return that HTML that we're putting in there into index.js, and that's going to fill our root. So let's go ahead and write the return that we're returning inside of this component. So parentheses div. Div is the HTML element that just like groups elements together. So let's make a H1. So that's a heading. And name it stock market. It's just gonna be like stock market on our page. It's just a heading. And then we're gonna want a search bar and the plot. Search. We're going to go over this in just a minute. Let's just write it down first.
Maybe I think it might be better to just show what the plot would look like before you do the search, as like with the current data that we have with just Facebook.
I see. Like just leave this to Facebook.
Yeah, just leave that to Facebook, and then
Okay.
we'll allow them to do the searching thing later.
So on line
Like,
21,
render the plot,
like just plot. Not
yeah,
search.
like render it in the reacting.
So let's set our stock symbol to Facebook. So we'll just like look at Facebook for now, and then afterwards we're going to make the search bar. So plot. This. Okay, so plot is a external resource that we got from this library, React plotly.js. And what this does, it makes a plot for us. So we don't have to actually code that. We just have to give plot some information for it to like plot. And that information we got right here, right? Like we filled it all out. So let's put inside our data. Type of plot that we're going to use is candlestick. And then X, we're going to pass in our X array that we filled up here. That holds the dates. That's going to be on the X axis. And these are the things that's going to hover over. And you can see I am missing a, okay, sorry, I'm missing a curly braces. Okay, so I'm just going to paste this in the chat. So we're not finished with the plot yet. We have to give it like dimension. So layout equals width of 1500. We'll give it a height of 1000. The title of search.
I think you should just set that to like Facebook for now.
Okay, let's give the
Title.
title of Facebook.
Yeah.
I put quotation marks, do you remember? I think it's all right.
I mean, if it gives an error, actually no, I think it's single.
Actually, we could just like not do it and then do it later. Export default. So this return is returning the HTML, which is the plot. At the end, like we have to export our code. So for like when we're gonna call it on the other file. So at the very end, like this is gonna be your last line, export default stock. So now we have to call the stock. We have to call this file in our other files for it to work. So app.js, and let's do that. We have to import it first. So import stock from, and then get the file. So periods / stock. And then, so we imported our code that we just wrote. So inside of here, let's call it. So because it's no longer, so like right now, the code is basically like one line, right? But because we're gonna call another thing inside of here, it's gonna be multiple lines. And so we need to enclose it inside of parentheses. So just add 2 parentheses to the ends, like before the semicolon and after the return. And then inside of this div, so inside of the open and close div, we're gonna call stock. So that is stock. And that should run. Okay, yeah, it does. So if you look on your right, it has like the graph. Don't have Facebook though. And I don't know if it's the API or my fault. Does it work for anyone? Any idea, Jason? Is it the API or something?
It maybe might be the API. Try doing a console.log. See if you're actually receiving data. So just console.log inside the then data. What's the problems actually? Click on.
This is not like red, but I put in the API call.
Is it? Is it usually supposed to be red? I mean, the good thing about working with APIs is that you can basically see what data is being returned. Oh, is that why?
So
I don't think it should make a difference though.
forward.
It says unexpected token.
Oh, I see why.
Oh yeah, so it's
Because we're using like these, what are they called? Do you remember?
no, I forgot. Maybe
So
Frank
because
knows.
we're using like the syntax where like you can pass in a variable inside of a string, right? So like we're passing in the variable stock symbol, right? So Facebook, we have to use this different, I don't even know what they're called, like this instead of like that, you know? Does anyone know what those are called? I don't know. It's the thing above the tab button. Just if anyone has trouble finding it, I could probably find the real name of it. It's not like the single quote, it's the backticks. Okay, yeah, I never knew that. But yeah, those are so in the API call, use those instead of quotes and it should work. And then, so yeah, we see on the right, this is like the stock of Facebook. Sadly, it's been down because of everything that's going on with Facebook. Yeah. Did that fix it for everyone else though? Is it good? I'm gonna assume yes. So yeah, basically we have like a stock tracker for Facebook, right? But let's say we want to search for all of them, not just Facebook. So what we want to do is we want to create a search bar button, and then so we can type in how do you open browser windows. So it's like the right panel. It opened for me like default. Is it like closed for you? You have to like open it because we're a browser. It was open when I opened the project. Yeah, it's closed. Okay. Yeah. Is it open now? You can actually press this button and it opens on like a full page. Yeah.
It's a toggle preview. So on the to the right of index.js, do you see that play button thing? Look. No, on your tabs. Like under Like, so you see to the left of browser.
Browser. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's the one. Yeah, it's the second one. That one.
Oh, okay. So this thing. Thanks.
Yeah.
I think someone said control something. So doesn't control D. Let's see. No, I don't know. Maybe it's different on my laptop. Oh, control shift T. Okay, no, I don't know. But yeah. So let's add that search feature. And so inside of our stock.js file, let's go back there. We're gonna put it like above plot, so like right here. Search bar and like the button. So what we are going to do is we're going to make another function / component, and which will do this for us. We can just write this for now, and then when we get to it, it will kind of be more clear as to what this does. So handle submit. Commit. Search. So there's a lot of errors, but don't mind those because we didn't write this function yet, so it doesn't know what like we're asking for. So let's go ahead and write it. I'm gonna choose to do it up here. It could be anywhere, just outside the scope of like outside the scope of stock function. So let's write it above it. Function search bar. And in this function, we're going to return like the HTML and like the data that we want to use for the search feature. So let's create a form. And inside this form, we're going to make a label. And this label is just going to, you know, the text before, like the search bar. So like search and stuff. Okay. And after that, we're going to do the input. So the input tag is HTML tag, which just like allows you to like type in stuff, right? So this input type is text. Type equal text. ID. Give it the ID of header search. Wrong. So this ID is what's going to make us retrieve this input. So like whatever the user writes in just a few lines. And then placeholder. Let's just give it Tesla. So placeholder, kind of like if you go on Google, how it has like search Google or type URL, this is like, that's just like a placeholder, right? And this entire thing is like an input field. So you type in anything and then like, right? So that's basically what input and placeholder is. So then after that, we have like the search, and then it's like the input part, and we want to have the button to actually search, like, submit it. So let's do that. Button. Type. There is this function called onClick. I'm going to remove that for now. I'm going to do that in just a second. So search. Okay. So this is it for now. So right now we have a search bar function, and when we call it down here, it's going to take this HTML, so like this form, right? This form that we just made that has a label, search a stock, the input, so like when you type in, and the button search. And that's going to be returned down here. Now, notice we have like these right here. These are called properties. And what they are is, so properties are used to pass data and event handlers to children component. So basically we're passing like the data that we get from like when a user types in the input field. So like if I type in, I don't know, IBM, then it's going to take this input and then it's going to take that input and handle submit, and it's going to pass it into the search bar function. So to do that, we're going to do props. So this is the parameter props. And then to access in here, to access this, this is the function handle submit. Or we haven't seen this one yet because we haven't written it, right? So this one might be more clear. So set search. Where have we seen set search? That is the function, right? That's the function that changes the value of the state, right? So we've seen that one. So to use this, or to call this function set search, we pass in this property search stock. We are going to hold off on using this one yet, but same thing follows as this property, right? So we're going to write a function handle submit inside of the stock function. We're going to do that in just a minute. But to call this function, we need to call this property, and the property we named it handling submit as well. So we're going to call that in here. So every time the search button is clicked on click, we're going to call the property. So open parentheses, props dot handling submit, right? Handling submit, it calls that, and what that does is it calls this function here. Any questions on properties? Be sure to put props in the parentheses. Okay, so now every time you press click, so like in Google, oh, they don't have a search button. Okay, so let's say they had a search button. Every time we type in IBM or something in the input and we press search, then when that button is clicked, it will call this function, handling submit, this one right here. So let's go ahead and write that out. Let's actually write out handling submit. Right here. Handle submit. Cool. Oh, I see. We call this one handling submit. This one handles submit. Okay, so they're different names, but so the function, another arrow function, right? So it doesn't take any parentheses. It just like does this, and this one we can call multiple times because it has a name. It's not like here where it doesn't have a function name. This one's called handle submit. So what do we want to achieve in this function handle submit? Every time someone clicks a button, what we want is we want the user's input. Like we want this input right here, IBM, when someone like types in something in like the input field, right? So like we want the input from here when someone presses on submit. So how do we get that? Well, how do we get that? So document.get element by ID. Remember that gets a ID, it gets an element, like an HTML element. And remember we gave the HTML element that we want to get the value of, which is the input. We gave an ID of header search. So let's go ahead and put that here. And to get the value, do dot value. And then that's how you get the value of the input. So what do we want to do with this input? We want to set the value of search to it. So to set this value of search, we have to call set search, right? So that's set search. And then the document dot get element by ID inside of it. And so we have a function. I'm really running out of time, and this part might take a bit of time. So I'm going to copy it and I'm going to go over it. And it goes inside of here. So I'm going to send in the chat. Just copy this, right? And put it inside of your input. So I'll highlight it and where it goes. So after placeholder, quote Tesla, copy that, type in the chat, and put it into input. So to go over what this does is on key down, okay, on key down is basically it checks like when a key is pressed. So like we saw, like Google doesn't have a search button, but how do you search on Google? You press enter, right? The enter key. So when the enter key is pressed, that's like on key down. It like the input field on key down like recognizes that this button was pressed. And then it takes E, which E is an event. So the event that happened. And then what it does is, well, we put it inside of this if statement, this condition statement. So if the event that happened has a key code of 13, what does that mean? So 13, every single key on your keyboard has a number associated with it. And so the number for the return or the enter key is the number 13. So when the event happened and the event is like the key that was pressed, and that key, if the key that was pressed has a code of 13, then that means it's a enter button. And what we want to do if the user press enter is we want to set the name of the stock to that input value, right? So if I were to type in IBM and I press enter, then I want this state right here. I want that state to equal IBM. And so down here, right, we do props. So the property, and then we do set stocks, props dot search stock. Search stock is the property that we passed into this function. And what search stock is equal to is this function set search. And this function set search is associated to the state, right? And how we set the state is by using the function set search. So communicatively, it just sets the state of search to whatever the input is. So I believe that is it. So let's give it a try. I didn't do anything, did I? Oh, I think I waited too long. Interesting. sometimes. Okay, I think I did something again. Does it work for anyone else? Because sometimes like this API is just wonky. Placement matters. Okay, I guess it does.
Yeah, the API was just being wonky. It's because you called it
Oh.
too many times.
I see. So does
Yeah.
it work for everyone else though? Just want to make sure. Okay, well, that's pretty much it.
Hold on. You change the placeholder to search.
Huh?
To search
All right.
because yeah, because you have to do that.
Search.
And then yeah, you gotta add a title too. So
It's here.
and then try it now.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, title just changes this right here. To whatever was searched, and then we had the placeholder Facebook, but now we have like the user input, so change that to search. So it takes like the state, the value of whatever someone searched, and outputs that. It's a free API, so sometimes it works and sometimes it's just like.
Did you add a dependency by the way to the use effect?
This.
Oh, you did. Okay. Yes, that means the API is just being wonky sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But for the most part, it works. Unless somebody took my key, and then
Imagine if somebody took your key and they're just calling the API.
Yeah, I mean, it worked a second ago, so after refreshing it a few times, it works. I promise. It's just free APIs. It's just on and off. But yeah, that's about it.
Oh, I mean, I made like 50 calls to your key. That's why.
Stop. Wait, really? Oh. Yeah, I think like typically after 10 calls to it, it's like on and off. I don't know.
Yeah, so this wouldn't happen if you had like if you were using a different API that you actually had to pay for.
Yeah.
But because this one is free and it's easier for you guys to set up without having to like input a credit card is the reason why we use this.
Yes. So yeah, I mean, that's about it. Hope you guys enjoyed that. If anyone has questions or is stuck, there's a way to share your code sandbox, and I'll just share that really quickly and how to do that. So like if you're stuck, there's this on the side right here. If you go to like the people thing, the live, you can press go live, and then it gives you a link. So you can copy this link and send it to like one of us. And then, so for instance, I'm gonna send this one to Jason. Jason, go in it. And now Jason, oh, your editor. Okay, but typically Jason would pop under like viewers and stuff. So then you just have to give Jason like editor access. So if anyone's stuck or has any questions, like send us your link and like we'll take a look at it and help. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I'm 9 minutes over time, but thank you for your patience. What was that?
I was like, this was amazing. I really liked it. It's a neat project, I think. Yeah, I think it's a neat graph, and you can take it in so many ways. But yeah, thank you everybody for participating and attending this workshop. It really means a lot. We'll be sharing this record. Well, let me stop recording actually.
Is there a feedback form? Thank you.